So let's look more closely at each one of these goals, enlarging the park and the civic space while preserving an appropriate amount of improved parking. Right now, what's in dark green is the actual green space that's out there. What's in the buff or the yellow color is the parking fields. The parking fields, I should point out right now, are very disorganized. And part of it just is the geometry of the shape. Cars are very relentless in the geometries that they want to park in. They don't lend themselves efficiently to parking into odd shapes and tight corners. And that's demonstrated when you're out there. In the northwest corner of the right-hand parking field, you have very little parking I've noticed, except for probably on the major event days. But even when it's there, the parking lot is not striped, so there's an inefficiency in those parking fields to begin with. We see that there's an opportunity to improve the parking and to improve the park space at the places where we need to improve the park space. And that primarily would happen in this area, because what's within those two lozenge spaces is the least efficient parking and the most important space relative to improving the experience of that park. So we showed this at the last time. We just said, listen, all other things aside, that this is the area where if we were left to design an extension to the waterfront experience, we would locate the green space in there. And coincidentally, it's the place where you need the deepest green space to shield the people on the boardwalk from the parking itself. We would want to improve and enrich the experience of the park without commercializing the waterfront. We contend that you can do that, and that the Firehouse Cafe demonstrates that. Imagine if a small amount of Main Street turns its face to the park, and rather than turning its back to the park, as all of it currently does. And we suggested that these two locations for future, as locations to consider development, would be the place that we would put them. And the reason we put them there is because they do a couple of things. They bookend and enclose the Market Landing Park in a way that was always intended in the master plan. They screen from the park to the parking, and they are close enough to Merrimac Street and to Water Street to get some continuation of the commercial activity on Merrimac Street to come into the site a limited distance. Maintain access and views to the waterfront park for all, but make it more inviting for all year round. Well, this is obvious. What we're saying is that the current use of the waterfront park is very dependent upon good weather and sunshine. There is no other activity or no other use in the Market Landing Park that would allow, in planner's jargon, eyes on the street, or the additional people to be close to the water's edge in a protected, lit, and heated area that would also offer comfort to other people who may want to use that park in the evening. Right now, I suspect if you went out there after dark, you'd find very few people walking along the edge. And I know, having been down here in the winter, that there are very few people out there during the winter. Now, I know there are also folks who will object vehemently and say, I'm down there every day of the winter for my walk, and God bless you if you've got that intestinal fortitude. In February, I probably wouldn't be, but that's not to say that you are strange for doing that, only that there are not that many of you. So finally, we need to find a way forward with this plan that's self-funding and sustainable. And primarily what that means, it means a lot of things. And so sustainability really is a cross-section of all these issues. But in this case, I think the primary driver, the one that we've been told, is that for all of this to happen, any improvements to the park, there needs to be a mechanism to fund it. And part of our charge has been to find the crossing point between some proposal that can pay for itself or perhaps generate a little extra to the municipality, but in any case is not something that is a direct public expense that then has a cost of maintenance moving forward. So sustainability is an issue, and that affects what the intensity of any proposal we would make. And then after our last meeting, I just wanted to refine a few of the goals that came out of that I think were stated a little more forcefully in the group that we were with in June, that the waterfront views be preserved and framed to minimize the impact of parking. People agreed with that and amplified that when we were talking. People wanted the enhanced connections of the downtown to the waterfront, and that seemed to be a very emotional issue. Several people brought up this issue and responded very positively to the idea that Main Street wouldn't turn its back anymore on the park, that there was an opportunity to create a sort of front door from Merrimac Street. I'm using Main Street in the generic term, but from Merrimac Street into the park, and that a better park means a better downtown and vice versa. So again, now we get to the meat of the issue. What may be appropriate here and what might not be. I would say that definitely everybody is on board with the idea that we would want to increase both the function and the size of the park space. And I think after our last meeting, I put out there the idea that architecture, some amount of architecture in the right proportion relative to the open space, could at the very, very most modest do no harm, and at the more realistic add very much to the quality of the green space that you all experience right now. And I offered this image not as a specific reference point or as anything in here that you could say we're proposing this, but just to suggest this idea that architecture as a backdrop to a green space can be a pleasing and a respectful contributor to the quality of that public space. So we left off the presentation with this image, and we'll go tonight to the proposed master plan design process. What I want to go through here, and this is a little less poetic, but it's more about really taking you through, once you start layering in all of the constraints and all the considerations that we've heard, it kind of leads inevitably to some sort of proposal, which we think is obviously the correct one. But we'll start out with this is the amount of area that is currently in the control of the NRA and is developable potentially by them. But you start layering in the other concerns, one of which being the shared access to other people's parking and to the Fisherman's Wharf at the eastern edge. And you take that off the table. You say, well, somehow we can't develop in that area because we need to preserve access through there. If you then layer in the 100-foot setback, which is mandated by Chapter 91 in terms of no uses other than water-dependent uses within that 100 feet, you take that off as an area that you could possibly develop in any kind of commercial way. If you then add in this one, which is a judgment call about what we as urban designers would say is a voluntary setback from the water's edge, and say we really wouldn't, even if we were allowed to, we wouldn't want to go closer than that second blue line, because we think that the experience of the waterfront really is about getting out to the edge and leaving the city behind to some extent. And then you take in the issues of the ways to the water, and which are historically and legally validated and preserved. You say that there is a legal restriction that we preserve these historic ways to the water. Their exact configuration is in flux, and we made the decision that maybe a more direct route out to the water's edge was logical and would make the resulting development space a little easier to handle, and you take that space out of the development equation. Now you take the existing waterfront trust way to the water, and you say we're going to take that. That's already been, regardless of where exactly the property line is, there's an expenditure of public funds that created a very nice walk to the water. We're not going to touch that, obviously. Now you start laying in the view corridors that you currently have and the ones that you would potentially want to enhance. And that blue triangle to the right there is starting from the right and working our way across the site. We have these current visual access points that take you out to the water. So when you subtract out all those things, you're left with these two areas. It's starting to look pretty much like the areas we defined before. Now if you add in this idea that we're claiming as architects, both the original master plan for the park and our forensic analysis of it suggests that the park wants some sort of enclosure. And we think that there ought to be some sort of bookend at that point to make formal and enclose the park right there. We also think that down at this edge of Merrimac Street, as all of you who know, who've walked leaving the Firehouse Cafe to your right and continuing down the road, it just peters out. There's no Main Street edge. Everything is back at Market Square. And once you pass the Firehouse Cafe, you get the entrance to the park and then a diffuse no man's land of parking and views to the back of house. So we suggest that some building would be helpful there to help complete the street. And then if you connect those things, you start to get an edge that makes sense and is defensible.